Hey there, Watershed. David here. I'm a shaven David. You've seen me with a beard most of the pandemic, but we're going to the beach. We're braving. I'm not sure if I should say that out loud because that maybe seems like a really irresponsible thing to do, but we're going to distance and we're not going to go into any restaurants or anything like that. And I hate sunscreen and I don't want to get sunscreen in a beard. That sounds truly miserable. And so now I look 25 years younger than I did last time you saw me. But I am joined this morning by a Twitter friend of mine. I think is probably the best way to describe her, Melissa Florer Bixler. I've had her on my podcast before, our podcast, the podcast I do with Tommy and Becca, who many of you know. And but mostly our interactions are via social media. But Melissa is sort of local to us here in Charlotte. She's up in the Raleigh-Durham area, is a pastor up there, and I'm actually going to. I'm not going to give any more detail. I'm going to let Melissa introduce herself. So Melissa, who is Melissa Florer Bixler to Melissa Florer Bixler?
Thanks. It's good to be here with you, David. Hi, Watershed. Good to be with y'all today. Who am I? I'm a pastor. And I am a pastor in the Mennonite Church. Know that often get asked a lot of questions about Mennonites and specifically about, why are you using a computer or where is your bonnet? And just often what I tell people is that both Sinead O'Connor and the Pope are both Catholic. And so in the same way, there are lots of different kinds of Mennonites who can be contained within sort of that family unit. But we all share some things in common. And probably the most important one is pacifism, that we are part of a tradition that has committed ourselves to stepping away from state violence. And so that's where my work emanates from, is this commitment to Jesus Christ as the reordering creation and restoring and redeeming creation, and then our ability to participate in that. And so that has allowed me to see Jesus at work in a lot of places in the world. And this job has allowed me in this sort of freelance for Jesus kind of way to get involved in that work. So one of the things that I do is I'm involved in the work of imagining a world without prisons, which sometimes we call prison abolition. And that began with work that happened when I actually was a pastor in Durham, pastor in Raleigh now, and with an organization that was bailing out mothers on Mother's Day. It's called the Black Mamas Bailout. It's a nationwide campaign. And it was that action sort of helped me to see some things I didn't know about the prison system before. And one of the most important things, I think, for us to know is that most people who are incarcerated today have never been convicted of a crime. They are incarcerated in jails because they cannot pay bond. And so really the system of bail bond in this country is a system that puts poor people in prison. So if I commit the same crime, David, you and I, let's say, commit the same crime, but I can't afford to pay bail, and you can get out on the streets. And it doesn't matter, really, there's only, if you commit a violent crime and are out on bail for $1 million, it doesn't matter that it's violent or not, you can still be out on bail. So bail is a system that criminalizes the poor who Jesus relentlessly puts himself on the side of in the Gospels. And that's how I got involved in that work.
Awesome. And I'm glad you started there because, what I know of you, just interacting via social media, talking on podcasts, you've got one book out. Is it just the one book so far? One book out with another one recently under contract that you're working on. If I was to just kind of list those things, so, you mentioned the prison abolition. I know you've done work in like work with disability communities and things like that. Your book, for those who might be interested in checking it out, your first book is all about the Old Testament and finding God in the Old Testament and maybe correcting what has often kind of been, maybe a Christian dismissal, even to an anti-Semitic sense of the Old Testament. And then your new book, which I hope we have time to talk about as well, as much as you can, and I don't know how much progress you've made on it, is all about enemies and having enemies. And what does that mean, as someone who, like you said, is a pacifist and is against violence and so those things. But I suspect, I would argue that you can probably see there's actually a common thread running through all of these areas of work. So you're nodding, so good. My gambit there, hoping that you would see that as well work. So maybe unpack that a little bit. Like, how do you get from, whatever the starting point is, and it's probably circular, like how do you get from prison abolition to sort of liberation work around disability and ableism to, the Old Testament, and then your new project about enemies and loving your enemies and having enemies? Like, how does that all fit together?
Yeah. One of the things that I'm grateful that Mennonites taught me is to take Jesus seriously. And I think that's actually the thread through all of this. I know that we have a tendency, all of us have a tendency to pick up the parts of the Bible that we feel fit into our lives, or we also proof text things. And I think as my growth as a Christian has gone on over time, I began to see that the places where I had been told to take Jesus seriously were different than sort of what was actually the sort of a thread that runs through Jesus's life. And I think this will sort of get into sort of what this new book is about having enemies, and that my experience in a pacifist tradition is that there's a sense of, well, we don't really have enemies. Like, this is all if we just talked it out, if you really knew the other person, then you would see that there's actually not that much difference between us, right? There's this, and I think there's especially been this movement towards this in progressive Christian circles, that really we have, we're not that far apart. And I want to say that we are actually that far apart, that we really are locked into these systems. And I mean, I'm in the book, I say these are satanic systems, that really is this sense that there is a power at work that keeps us locked into these systems. And it's not that we don't understand each other, it's that system has to go. We have to do the work of deconstructing the system that we're in order for us to be able to move into this new order, this new social order that Jesus initiates with his life, death, and resurrection, that then spills out into this Pentecostal community of that is defined by their sharing, right? This is the first thing that happens after Pentecost, is people begin to share what they have in common. They pay each other student loans off, and they have an extra lawnmower, and that begins this. What I think is not just meant for the church, right? This, because we actually see that there are people outside the church who are doing this better than we are. And because the church at some point, or, around Constantine, gets enveloped into this, this narrative of violence that eventually births this category called race. And then race becomes intertwined with Christianity from then on. And so we need people outside of us to, like, we can't even see ourselves anymore, right? We need someone to say to us, you have been co-opted into this this kingdom, this principality, right? This domain, this dominion. And you need to break out of this. And there is this new world that you have been, that's welcoming you, that you have been initiated into in Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I love that. And So I guess we've got to get specific then. So maybe one of those enemy systems, very concretely would be like the prison industrial complex. But then once we name that, there's these other interconnected systems that we have to name. So white supremacy, low hanging fruit, capitalism, perhaps, in the way that and mass incarceration is, if you've seen the documentary 13th, or I don't know, read Michelle Alexander's. I mean some of the kind of popular resources right now, you would know that this is almost a new form of slavery. It's a new form of I'm not even sure if wages is even the right word to use. It's almost free labor, allowing people getting very, very rich off of these things. So on some level, I think these are things that this season in the pandemic has been an opportunity for our people to become familiar with this notion of demonic or satanic systems. We've been in smaller group spaces or been in dialogue with other pastors, thinkers, authors like yourself, who have said the same thing from a different perspective, from their own vantage point. And so hopefully that's becoming apparent watershed. You're seeing once again the common thread between many of these dialogue partners that we've engaged with. But then one question I have for you, Melissa, is what happens more at the individual level? So like, what happens when we can see the system, but then we can also see particular individuals? Maybe they're us, but maybe they're individuals within our communities, within local businesses, within our government, local, federal, whatever. How do we navigate the feelings that we might feel towards these individuals who are complicit, either actively or passively, with these enemy systems? What does it look like to kind of navigate the tension between resisting them as part of the system, but also loving them and seeing them in some way also being held captive by those same systems?
Sure. Well, I think it's always helpful to remind people that Jesus was really angry at people in the Bible. And so we have those verses that, be angry, but do not sin, right? And there actually is this strong tradition of demands for justice, of people who cry out. And, we have this tradition in the Psalms. They're called imprecatory Psalms, which means cursing Psalms, which, I think it is a way to categorize those as dismissive in some way. Like you're sort of offering this curse on someone. Whereas most of the time, these are the cries that come from the deepest part, like the deepest well of dispossession of a people who, unlike us, there's no organizing in the streets against Babylon, right? Mm-hmm. So a people who have been completely dispossessed of their ability to act on their own behalf. And I think that those of us, for people like me, who sit at the corner of whiteness and American nationalism, and that's sort of my position of power in the world, I want to take seriously what it means to take hold of that anger for myself as a person who is in solidarity. I never really felt comfortable with this until I heard the theologian Willie Jennings talk about this. And one of the things that he talks about is that one of the ways that white supremacy works is that it always stands at a distance. It's this sort of language of I could never understand you. And so until we're actually willing to inhabit and sort of let that anger work on us, I think that we are continually falling back into some spaces of solidarity with enmities that sort of betray our ability to move forward in solidarity with communities that are suffering. Mm-hmm. And so one way I think about that is in this language where I constantly hear what white people ask, myself included, how do I love my enemies, mm-hmm. right? This is, and I think that if you go into a community of people who have been historically marginalized, the answer is you create a world where they are no longer enemies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You create a world where they no longer are in the position to victimize you. It's not about eliciting sympathies for them or having this sort of emotional reaction. The best thing we can do for our enemies is to create a world where they don't have to be people's enemies anymore. Yeah, and so that's why it matters that we talk about these things as systemic issues, and why I think it's important for us not to shy away from our anger or to sense guilt or frustration about that. I am Enneagram 8, so I'm very comfortable with this. If you need a little consultation on feeling angry about things, I got you.
Sure, but that's helpful because I think our default, and I'm using R very broadly, not just for watershed, but I think I don't know, kind of just in 21st century mid-COVID America, like our default is to think that on some level we have to change hearts. And what you're saying, to be super clear, is you don't change hearts, you change worlds. And being able to not just imagine, but then once you've imagined, struggle towards a world in which there's almost not even a heart to change because the previous position is almost like unintelligible. It's untenable. It doesn't make sense anymore. And I don't know. I find that hopeful because I don't know. I've been part of a few holiday exchanges with family members who have different politics than me. I've been a part of a few Facebook conversations. I have a Twitter account, just full stop. And so the notion of heart change, if we're thinking about just trying to one heart at a time, kind of win them over persuasively, I don't know, our prospects seem really dismal. But this notion of reimagining a world, I don't know why that seems more accessible, but it does. It seems like something, but to your point, part of that is, first you sort of have to define reality, and that's naming enemies. We have to, say like, this is the thing that cannot be part of this new world. Mm-hmm. Am I hearing you correctly in that?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that also repositions, or I should say, what I think is fascinating about what Jesus does is repositions our expected enmities, right? So it's not that Jesus says you aren't going to have enemies anymore. It's that you're going to have enemies that you didn't expect, right? And one of the places, you sort of talk about like the awkward family meal is that Jesus says your family will be your enemy, right? Like it's, whereas the people who you thought are untrustworthy, are morally lax, who are like tax collectors, if they say that they've changed and they give up all their money, they follow Jesus, that sort of moral hierarchy sort of built, that is gone. They've shown with their lives that they have done with their lives what's needed to happen. And so I think this actually puts us in a place for learning and openness to groups who we formerly thought were our enemies, right? That we are enemies by religion, enemies by nationalism, whereas actually the people who may be your enemies are the people who most look like you. Maybe the people who are in your socioeconomic group, who you feel comfortable with all the time. And I don't mean this in a sense of these are like, as we know, the whole idea is that you don't hate your enemies, but you have to recognize them. You have to name them, and to name that the complicity of enemies who look like you is this really powerful and incredibly painful part of the gospel for the disciples. It's like unimaginable to them that their family would be their enemies. And man, Jesus hammers that home over and over.
So you've evoked, understandably, you're a Christian pastor, you've evoked Jesus a number of times, but your first book is about the Old Testament where Jesus, at least in the same, ostensibly doesn't appear. And so connect that thread for us. You have this book, Fire by Night, I assume that's evoking like the Exodus narrative and the pillar of fire.
Right.
I read like a third of the book when we interviewed for the podcast a year and a half ago. But so connect that third of us. Where does your work with kind of illuminating the Hebrew scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, connect with this broader kind of emancipatory project that you're kind of engaged in these other areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the same project. Or something I think often remind people of, and I know this well because my first degree is in Second Temple Judaism. Those rabbis, those sort of like who become the Pharisees who become the rabbis. When Jesus says things like, you have heard it said, he's not talking right about the Hebrew Bible. He's talking about the interpretations of these different various sects that are happening.
He's working within a tradition, not outside of it.
That's right. And so really what we're looking at is an interfamily, an intercommunal dialogue. What we see between Jesus and Pharisees and Sadducees and maybe some Essenes, John the Baptist, is not the model for us for interreligious dialogue.
Right.
It's actually the model for us for thinking about our relationships with other Christians who have different interpretations of Scripture, and so Jesus again and again is taking this word of liberation built into this covenant that continues to sort of surprisingly include people like Ruth and Rahab, these where there's this pretty consistent prophecy that one day all the nations of the earth will stream into Zion. We also see in Isaiah the condemnation of religious leaders. Like Jesus these are all echoes. Jesus echoes back all of these themes and sort of and pushes them along into human life in the body of God. And so for me, it's a seamless project for me. We always have this sort of like, what do you call these two parts of the Bible? And sometimes I just wish we called it the Bible because I think it unnecessarily puts us into positions where we're being asked to negotiate two things instead of just saying this is all the same thing.
That's good, and I think that's pertinent for this community because Watershed it's ostensibly Christian. It's most of our people, not all certainly, but a large number are maybe coming out of maybe more of an evangelical context, and so a lot of us are whether we have a label for it or not, ex-evangelical or post-evangelical. There's kind of an attempt to reckon with, am I still a Christian? What does that even mean? All of a sudden, there's these other faiths, other spiritualities, both Eastern and Western, which used to be so taboo, and now maybe we're finding life in them and stuff. And so, kind of within what you just kind of said about locating Jesus not outside of, but within this Jewish tradition and this kind of intra-Jewish dialogue. Now, obviously, Christianity has evolved even beyond whatever it was when Jesus walked the earth. There's the institutional piece that you alluded to earlier with Constantine, 1,500 or so years ago, and kind of what it's evolved into now. But, for someone who is either comfortable or at least wanting to be comfortable still identifying as a Christian, as they're becoming aware of Christianity's historic complicity with things like white supremacy, with anti-Semitism, and things like that. What would your advice be? Because you're a Christian pastor. You know all this. You're some would say an expert in it. You've written a book on it. You've got a Twitter platform. So what does it look like? Why Christianity still? Like how does that still work? Today in the 20th century, mid-COVID, mid-Black Lives Matter movement, and everything else that I think people, are both conscious and unconsciously feeling, kind of in our contemporary cultural moment.
Yeah. On the sort of pessimistic side, I think something I know now from decades of doing this church thing and seeing things that are outside of churches. It doesn't get any less complicated. You know, activist communities have multiple ways of doing activism that are sometimes in opposition to each other. So it's not like you're going to find something out there that crystallizes this this sort of pure way of being in the world. Every single thing exists within this system that humanity has built through destruction and violence, and so part of it, I think, is that this sort of search for something that is going to be unproblematic, that just does not exist. There's no economic system like that. But at the end of the day, I continue to be compelled by Jesus, by the life of Jesus, by the life of Jesus that I see in other people, and by my Black church colleagues, by people I know in Tucson, Arizona, who spend their time walking people who've crossed the border past gangs to shelters so that they're not kidnapped. People who follow Jesus have done incredible things, and it's hard for me to imagine giving up on that, even as I see other people doing incredible things that also speak into my faith. And yeah, at the end of the day, I continue to be compelled by this person of Jesus.
Awesome. So one area of your work that we've kind of nodded towards, but haven't given you a chance to kind of articulate more explicitly yet, is your work in disability communities. And I think that is maybe, kind of the systemic intersection that maybe I think naturally gets overlooked in these conversations, because we can, I don't know, I have found that it's pretty, if you're looking for it, it's pretty on the nose to see maybe the kind of intersection between like white supremacy and something like capitalism. You can see the ways that these are mutually reinforcing, kind of creating these, divisions, resisting solidarity, at a class level, and using a notion like race to, kind of create these divisions, these enmities and things like that. But I think for those of us who are not either part of or in or alongside disability communities, I think it'd be really easy to just kind of gloss over and miss the ways that kind of forms of ableism and things like that are also another one of these intersections, these systemic intersections of oppression and dehumanization. So so really any insight or any kind of wisdom that your experiences can impart, help us to see maybe that that intersection both systemically and on a personal individual level as well, maybe a bit more clearly.
Yeah, I've been listening very closely to the voices within the Black Disabled Lives Matter movement that are specifically naming what that intersection looks like of being Black and being disabled. And I think especially at this moment to recognize that that people who are disabled, especially people who have a mental illness, are often much more likely to be victims of police shootings and deaths. And so even right now, I think this, like you're saying, this is right in front of us, that we have used policing as a way to sort of to do the sort of cleanup for something that we don't want to actually be bothered with, which is the lives of disabled people. We would prefer the police to just come in and take them away, to put them out of sight, and that has to do, like you're saying, with who is it who really matters in our world. White bodies, male bodies, straight bodies, able bodies, and anything that deviates from that has to fight for a place.
Mm-hmm.
I specifically have lived in communities and intentional communities with people with intellectual disabilities, which gets even more complicated because finding ways for people with profound intellectual disabilities to advocate for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and it is in itself a challenge because you're always navigating this. Am I inserting myself into this person's advocacy? But I think what it's done for me is it's helped me to ask that question of myself. One of the most important phrases around disability advocacy is "nothing about us without us." And so how do you continue to center the lives of people who are at this intersection of economic vulnerability and police brutality and being Black in a white supremacist society, and let them speak into the kind of world that they imagine for themselves, and to join ourselves to that struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, again, commend, I think Twitter is an incredible educational tool to follow people who don't necessarily get a book deal, right? Who don't have access to the kinds of platforms that develop through the Washington Post or the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you really want to get at the ground level and you're brave, then you can get on Twitter and at least lurk around for Black Disabled Lives Matters. I highly recommend that.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, for all of its, I don't know, to put it charitably, idiosyncrasies, in some ways, I feel like I've learned as much from just exposing myself to voices that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise on Twitter as I did in seminary. Which even in a self-aware seminary that is trying to decolonize its programs and its theology and increasingly kind of diversify and be inclusive of kind of non-paradigmatic Western white voices, acknowledging that when we say theology we normally mean white theology, and we put little modifiers on all the other theologies. Even in that space, there's still so much work to be done. Whereas Twitter, you can, to your point, you can get almost get on the ground level and no, I can actually hear from this community or these individuals directly, and bravery is required, as you said, but there is it's one of the, I don't know, people have asked me if I could get rid of social media, would I? And it's I don't know. Sometimes I think absolutely this has been a cancer on our existence, and other times I'm yeah, but without Twitter I probably would still be a homophobic, kind of conservative, white supremacist, and unaware of all of that, pastor at some megachurch somewhere. And so I don't know, but your point, it's messy. There's not going to be these kind of clean cut solutions. It's disruptive, it's contradictory, and kind of requires kind of being a willingness to hold that sort of tension. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's one example, and there are others, of the fact that people who are at the margins of historic power always have to look for places to do their theology, to do their work in the cracks of things, right? Brittany Cooper talks about this. So Black women's theology came in cookbooks and in children's stories, and even in the Mennonite church, that a lot of our theology comes through songs. Women for a long time didn't have access to the pulpit, but they could write music. And so I think social media is one example of that, but we actually have to go looking for the places that are not just books that are published that somebody managed to get a book proposal through, or the chair of the seminary. If we really want to see what is happening, this really courageous and expansive work, it's going to require us to look into places where things are unexpectedly happening.
Oh, that's good. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert on being a Mennonite relative to me, but that what you just said kind of feels very Mennonite, and I don't know if I go as far as to call it like iconoclastic, but like this non-hierarchical, non-authoritarian, like there's no, you mentioned degrees and seminary and things like that. And one of the things that our community has been navigating, but also hopefully celebrating, is kind of this de-authoritization, of the way that we make decisions, of our notions of leadership and hierarchy and things like that. And there's so many instances where I think, we take for granted that the way things are is the way things naturally are. Mm-hmm. And not that there was, some very clear intentionality around purposely, creating them that way in order to advantage some at the expense of others.
Sure.
And so, I don't know, from what I've learned of you, probably, as much as anyone, about what it means to be a Mennonite is you getting yourself embroiled in Twitter debates about baptism and things like that are, it's just this commitment to both question and de-authoritize the things that we kind of take for granted as normative, mm-hmm. which often serves to drown out the voices of those who don't fit normally within those normative structures.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think it's when I first joined the Mennonite church, because I'm not an ethnic Mennonite, I think I did have that sense of like, oh, wow, finally found the perfect church. And, you get like 2 minutes later, you're like, oh, right. You guys have problems too. And yeah. And so, I think that what's holding your tradition to its own values is a really powerful way for us to, and I think that's true with Christianity too. Like, how can we call ourselves back to the Jesus that we have met in the scriptures? How can the Mennonite church call itself back to these non-hierarchical practices? Because it did. I mean, it prioritized the voices of men, right? It prioritizes the voice of able-bodied people and able-minded people, and so we've struggled with this as well. But at the same time, I think there are some practices like multiple preaching voices and anti-clericalism that open up the door a little bit wider for us.
Sure. Hear that, Watershed? That's why we have so many people preaching, and even more so during COVID. It's why you get to meet a new face every single weekend. So, well, Melissa, in closing, because we're kind of coming up on the end of our time together, because some of the things that you find yourself working in, some of the areas you find yourself working in, disability communities, prison abolition, those might seem daunting or inaccessible, intimidating to people who maybe are coming awake to kind of the intersections of some of these systems, these enemy systems that we want. That first we need to name, to your point, and then once we're naming them and can imagine a world without them, then that's not just going to magically happen. Work takes place, struggle takes place. So. Obviously, you're not in Charlotte. You're up north of us, but maybe more broadly speaking, what are some good ways for people to maybe dip their toe in and hopefully keep going after that into some of this sort of advocacy work?
I think one encouraging thing for me is always a reminder that somebody, a primarily affected person, has led in this work. And so I think that's important to remind people that there are people on the ground, there are people who are already leading this work out of their experience, and what we can do is help each other find those people. So there's already prison abolition work going on. And what we can do is say, I have not experienced incarceration, and I want to be a part of ending the carceral system as we know it. How can I be a part of that? And so, we have a lot of tools to do that. We have networks, we have ways to connect. But I think it's always important to remember that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need the church version of something else. Like, it is already holy work, what is happening on the ground, and to join ourselves up to that. And I'm sure you've had other people say this as well. And just recognizing that we're going to make mistakes along the way. And I'm a huge advocate of educating yourself as you're going along in the work. trying to like pre-educate yourself and so that you never say the wrong thing, or you will just never stop. It just becomes this sort of form of narcissism, right? Like I need to like fix myself before I can, and it just means you're never going to get anything done. So moving boldly towards this work, recognizing that we're going to get it wrong and people will call you back in, and will help you find your way, and is really sticking with it. That's the brave part, especially for white people, is being able to say, I am willing to risk this very small thing of being wrong, in order for other people's liberation that I already enjoy. And I think we can do that. That's something we can offer.
Absolutely. Well, Melissa, thank you. It's been a pleasure. As always, I'm thinking Twitter and then now over Zoom. So maybe, you're not too far from us. Maybe when this is all safe again, we could have you down here in person,
great.
Hang out with us. But that's actually been one of the cool things over the last couple of weeks. We've gotten to hang out with people who are either local to us or at least in North Carolina. So it's like, hey, there could actually be a future, actual collaboration kind of beyond the confines of Zoom in the future. But if people are feeling brave, want to follow you on this mythical Twitter that we've been talking about, how do people kind of follow your work, stay in some level of contact with you going forward?
Yep, just my name, Melissa Florer Bixler. I should come up. Just apologize in advance for anything I said, when I was hungry. So yes, but.
Awesome. Well, Melissa, thank you. Take care. I know, before we hit record, we were talking about just the stress that we're sharing right now as parents here in North Carolina, having to choose between, mostly bad options when it comes to our kids and stuff like that. Watershed, I know those have been conversations that we've had within our community. And so Melissa, hang in there.
You too.
Don't really have anything else affirming to say beyond that, but solidarity. So Watershed, we love you. Good to see you as always. Thank you for continuing to support us and just kind of be part of what we're doing here during these unprecedented times. So we love you. See you soon.